Okay, well, I have a minute after, so we'll go ahead and get started. See that we've got, I think, 1, 2, 3, 4 institutions in. And so wanted to get started a little bit later, maybe about a week or a week and a half later this fall than what we had anticipated, or that I had anticipated at least. But as we get started this fall, we're kind of on that downhill slide into collecting the samples. And I know that several institutions had already mentioned that they have the samples put together. It's just a matter of where and what and how to send and submit those so that they're available for us when we roll around to the LEAP Texas Forum in February. And so we wanted to start that conversation. We've kind of had some conversations about the demographic data and stuff like that, but the focus today is going to be on de-identifying the samples of student work. And then the next meeting will focus on the actual mechanics of using the live text system in order to submit the samples that we have. Is everybody hearing me okay?
Yep.
Okay, all right, just making sure before I get too far in. We have 7 institutions at the moment that are participating. This is the list of those institutions and then all of the contacts that we have for those institutions. It's at this point, we're not quite past the point of no return to where we won't be adding any institutions, but if there was another institution at this point, especially a community college that was interested in participating, we still haven't gotten quite past that point just yet. I think we'll hit that point probably about November. Yeah, and I saw the email, but go ahead, because I'm not remembering it off the top of my head just yet.
St. Edward's is interested in participating. Of course, they're a private institution, but they expressed interest while we were in Milwaukee at the LEAP State Summit. So I'll be interacting with David more from there.
Right. I think you had also mentioned, I think we've got some folks that are interested in being evaluators as individuals, even though the institution's not participating.
Yes. I had a question from Houston Community College, if faculty could participate even though the institution is not participating, and my response to that was certainly faculty could participate as coders.
Right.
Or raters.
Yeah, and we'll be getting those announcements for those that, we'll be getting those announcements out across the LEAP Texas listserv later this fall in terms of that final call for those that want to participate as evaluators, in addition to the evaluators that will be participating from each of these institutions that are submitting samples. This is an older slide that I want to kind of bring back in, just kind of a refresher. We had this last spring where we had talked about kind of the short-term, the mid-term, and the long-term goals. And again, a lot of this is still working on the short term, but then starting to look towards the midterm in terms of how, once we get to the calibration sessions at LEAP Texas Forum in February, then we'll start accomplishing some of those midterm goals. And when we've got all of those evaluators in the room together in February, and we're starting to look at how we're applying this written communication rubric, we'll start clarifying kind of a statewide interpretation of what those LEAP value rubric, in that particular LEAP value rubric means and how we're going to apply it. And better articulate the differences between, let's say, a level 1 performance, a level 2 performance, and a level 3 performance, and so on. And what that'll do is that'll give us kind of that statewide perspective from LEAP Texas as an organization of how that group of faculty applied that rubric, and then that'll provide information back to our local assessment processes. A couple of things to follow up on before jumping into the de-identifying the samples is kind of looking at that sampling method and then also looking at the demographic data, because those are starting to get to the point where they're a little bit more firm. We've reviewed the sampling method several times. We reviewed the demographic data several times. So kind of any changes that we make are going to start settling down and into kind of a final format for each one of these. So, and then Larry, you can go ahead and talk about these next two.
No, I'm fine, unless there's a question.
Yeah, any questions on this? The only thing it's not really substantively different is before we kind of had the parameters listed, and then we had the last thing we had talked about was the time frame of where the samples, when the samples would be taken from or which semesters, and that's noted in that first row. Now that all the samples we expect would be from this past spring, this past summer, or this coming fall semester. So
we're good over here, Arlington.
Okay, go ahead.
Melissa, was there a question?
Oh no, that still works for us over here in Arlington. That Julie has a confused look upon her face, so I'll let her speak. So we've talked about the fifth one, no more than 10 to 15 documents from a single section a number of times. Is that what we decided, or was it 25? It seems like we moved that up in a previous discussion.
Yeah, no, I think we had, and then I'll adjust that up. Generally, and I think when we had talked about that, the general idea there is not to, if we're taking 75 samples from a core curriculum course, I know that some of the universities, it would be possible to get that many samples from a single section in some cases. And that's really kind of the main thing that's wanting to prevent. We're wanting a little bit better cross-section than, very, very few sections.
Right. I thought we had changed it to up to 25 from a single section. We still have a limiter, a limit, but not a no more than.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and make a change to that so I don't miss that again.
Back in my notes and make sure of that, but that's just what I recall.
Okay. Any other comments or questions on the sampling methods? Okay. On the demographic data, the last thing we had talked about was kind of starting to get the specifications around each of these. And so I've put it in a little bit different format, and then also noted what we had discussed before, that we were going to use the COBOARD requirements for the data and the responses for each of those. So we'll report the gender, the race, and the ethnicity the exact same way for each student that we reported to the COBOARD. And so as you look through that, see if there's any questions about the demographic data.
Another question. I guess I'm the questioner today, Chris. Sorry. Birth date, Pell, and first generation may be accessible for some of us.
Right, we had talked about, and that's the one thing we'll want to add there, is if you don't have that information, then we'll have an NA. And we had talked about that before, is that some of that may not be available.
Right. It may just bear putting an asterisk by the ones that as available.
Okay.
So Pell and first gen, you're not, it's not available to you?
Do I, at
Pell
UTR?
eligible and first generation is not available?
I think if I recall in the last conversation, Lorraine had made the comment that the reason she was questioning using it was because it was self-reported, and then you guys said, well, all of it is self-reported on your end as well, so that was where the Pell identification question had kind of come into play. But we do have access to it. She just was questioning the quality of it as self-reported.
Okay.
Does that ring a bell?
Yes. Does everyone else have, is there anybody that doesn't have that available to them, Pell eligibility or first generation?
We might have it available, but we're not quite sure. We didn't know that you were expecting this, so we haven't requested it yet.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Barry, I mean, I have never seen that in any data request that has come across my desk. So, to my knowledge, Pell and first generation are not easily accessible.
I think you can get these, but I'm not sure.
Who just spoke before Jeannie?
Julie?
Okay, Julie. I guess the question would be, could you check and see if it would be available to you? And let us know.
Yes, the flow comes through Lorraine on all of this, so ultimately she will be the one to have the determining final answer. So,
Okay.
recalling what she said, like I said, I think it was just a question of the quality of the information, but I believe after you guys talked last time, she kind of was like, yeah, we can get that. If you guys are self-reported as well, then that's fine. We can get that for you. So we'll double check with her and
Let you know.
yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay,
Any other questions?
The other one that jumps out at me is semester credit earned. So that would be a numerical progress to date, and that's another one I'm not aware that we have.
Right, and that's where we had originally talked about that being kind of the primary filter on where the student was in their academic career. And that's because of that concern, that's where we added the classification.
Exactly.
So if we're capturing classification or semester credit earned, I don't know that necessarily both are going to be available at every institution. And so
That's
I will,
my thought.
yeah, I'll add an asterisk to that one as well.
You might add a double asterisk and say either or something.
Okay. Any other questions or comments on the demographic data? Okay. All right. So to look at the de-identifying the samples, kind of going to go back to our April 26th webinar when we were first talking about IRB and FERPA. One of the central elements of kind of this entire process is an assumption that we're going to be de-identifying all of the samples. So we have to do that because when we were talking about IRB and FERPA in the spring, is that the exemption status is, as it says here from 46.101b, is that research involving the use of educational tests, survey procedures, interview procedures, and observations, the kind of things that we're doing are exempt unless the information that we have has identifying information. And so a lot of, if not all of RRB exemptions are dependent upon the notion that we've de-identified all the samples that we're sending across. And so that is something that we each have to engage before we submit samples to the live text system. The goal for that is ultimately that when an evaluator is sitting and looking at a sample next February at the Leap Texas Forum, or after that as we're completing those assessments, is that when they look at an individual sample, there's really no way for them to determine or to deduce who the student is, who the instructor is, who the institution is that sample was drawn from. Now, of course, it's going to be easier to ensure that they can't identify the student. It's going to be easier to kind of mask or de-identify the faculty. We do understand that sometimes that the institution may be a little bit easier than the other two to kind of deduce from the information or the type of the assignment or maybe some of the details in the assignment. But we do want to make the best effort possible to de-identify and redact information from each of the samples to the point that it makes that very, very difficult for them to do. And again, that is to attend to kind of a lot of the assumptions that we've built into the IRB exemptions or approvals that we've each processed at our own institution. So the first thing is what to redact, and some of this stuff's obvious. Just want to run through it just a matter of course. Of course, the student names, professor name, institutions. Some of the things that where it starts to get a little bit tricky is if there's locations that are identified depending upon the nature of the assignment. And this also jumps off into when we're talking about where to redact, is that depending upon the nature of the assignment, there may be identifying information included in the body of the assignment itself. I've got a few examples around that to kind of give some ideas of where that may occur. The other thing that you may have to watch for is, and again, it depends upon the nature of the assignment, other names of, whether it's faculty or students that are mentioned within the body of the assignment. So where to redact, I think the title pages are kind of obvious. The headers and the footers are obvious. Where it starts to get a little bit less obvious of where you need to redact information from is when we start talking about the file properties or the body of the document. Now, on the where to redact on the title pages, of course, in this instance, we've redacted the institution, the instructor, and the student. And then I highlighted the course as well. And the note that I wanted to make there is that if there's so few course sections of a specific course that is available, then to the point that the instructor could be identified, then that would be an instance where you would want to go ahead and redact that. If you're taking it from, a sample from one of the latter sections in the core, for us, one of the lab science courses, then there's enough of those that we wouldn't necessarily have to worry about redacting that as long as we got the name of the student and the instructor. But if there was a section number on it, on the paper that the student had submitted, we would want to redact that because that would allow us to track back potentially, if somebody wanted to track back to the specific instructor. And so really that's kind of the only note that I wanted to add on the title pages. And then the header and the footer. And one caution about this that we learned when we were submitting to the multi-state collaborative is that students don't always know how to use headers and footers, so don't make assumptions about how those have been formatted or included. We had an instance where we were redacting student names out of a header, and we caught it on the first page, but it wasn't a recurring footer. It was something wonky at the top to where it didn't repeat. So when we redacted it on page 1, it didn't automatically redact it on page 2 because the student had formatted it funky. I think they somehow managed to put in a section break so that page 2 was not the same header as page 1. And so you've got to watch for those instances as well around some of these. Now, one of the places that we learned pretty quickly that you have to pay attention to, especially if you're sending across samples that are in the Word format, then when you go over to the File tab or the Windows button on the document, it shows that highlighted. It actually shows the author and who last modified it. That very clearly will identify the student, or at least it identifies the person that owned the license of Microsoft Office that they were doing, from which they were doing their paper or doing their assignment. And so that needs to be redacted as well. One strategy for doing that, and this is the one we actually used for the MSc, is that we just converted everything over to PDF, and we did that in a way that it did not carry the metadata for the file. So all of the metadata in terms of like when it was last modified, when it was created, last printed, the author, the last modified by, all that information was stripped out when we converted it to PDF. And we did that intentionally to help us be a little bit more certain that we weren't missing any of that identifying information that could be nested within the file properties. Any questions about kind of those three things? I've got one more example, but I wanted to see if anybody had any questions or thoughts about the redaction thus far.
I think submit as PDF is a very wise route to go. I know that Julie has a thought from experiences here as well. And was to take each document and scan on our scanner, scan to PDF, and that way it'll retain no metadata whatsoever, so I won't have to redact anything. We'll just have the machine name.
Right. Yeah, we ended up collecting everything electronically, and the coordinator in our office, when we were doing it for the multi-state collaborative, identified a very quick process for him, at least, to make sure everything got stripped out in much the same way that you're talking about. The one that kind of snuck up on us, like I said earlier, was the header, where the students just don't create and format the headers the way we'd expect them to. And so the coordinator in our office that was working on that MSc submission did start having to kind of go through and make sure that we were catching all of that on each of those pages. Now, one of the things that we ran into is we ran into instances in which, like in some of our music appreciation or art appreciation courses, where the assignment being used in the course to attend to the core objectives, critical thinking, communication skills, and especially social responsibility, ask students to attend a recital or a music performance and to talk about that in a variety of ways and from a variety of perspectives. Well, what that led to is kind of an introduction that you see here, in which they're talking about a recital and they're listing off all sorts of names. They're listing faculty names, student names, building names. And it's just this laundry list of, like, if I wanted to search for any of those things in that first paragraph, then I could very easily identify the institution without question. But then there's also other specific student names and faculty names and stuff that start to, from our perspective, as our coordinator and I were looking at this, we don't know. There was actually, they did, in some of these papers like these, they did mention the faculty specifically, and others they didn't. And so we had to start being very careful that we were catching all those instances that might identify a faculty member, or identify a student, or even identify other students that were in the process. Because in this instance, it was talking about a vocal recital that mentioned or identified other specific students. So the entire body of the paper was talking about these other students' performance. Now, granted, it's an open and it was a public performance because it was a recital, but it's just one of those things that we did not want to tinker with, leaving certain names in and certain names out. So we just started trying to redact all of it. And we did have some instances where we were concerned about whether or not the redactions would start to interfere with understanding what certain parts of the body of the paper. Largely, that's going to depend upon the nature of the assignment. If it's kind of a straightforward, content-specific assignment around certain topics that are more discipline-driven, and of course this is all discipline-driven, but there's a very significant reflection piece where if they start reflecting on things and doing that, or even from personal responsibility, considering their own perspective, that's where you get an increased likelihood that you're going to start getting these other names, these other locations and things in the body of the sample itself. So any questions or kind of comments on that? I don't know to what extent that's going to be a significant concern in other institutions. I just know that when we first started, some of this is a byproduct of the first rubric that we were using around social responsibility. It had a self-reflection piece in it, a self-reflection criteria in the rubric itself. So a lot of the assignments, the ones that were validly aligned to the rubric, we're asking students to reflect. So that's where it kind of interjected that issue for us as an institution when we start looking at kind of these interinstitutional assessment projects. Does anybody have a feel for how likely it is that you're going to encounter assignments like that, or is there a concern, or is it something you just don't have a read on just yet?
Chris, this is Julie. We'll definitely encounter that.
Okay.
I have so far.
And again, the purpose and kind of the guiding, the principle that we used, especially once we started digging into the body of the paper to redact, was, is it possible for an evaluator to reasonably identify the institution from what was there? And then we took it, that's kind of what we're asking for the purposes of this project. We went a step further institutionally, that we didn't even want an evaluator, if they wanted to go out to the internet and start doing searches, we didn't want them to be able to track back and identify the institution, even if they were to do that. And so that is kind of a judgment that's made locally in terms of what you feel is necessary to attend to your IRB exemption requirements.
Yeah, that's fair.
Any other thoughts on what to redact and where to redact? Is there anything that we haven't talked about that maybe need to be included in either of those two lists? Okay. If you think of other things as you start looking at the redaction, if you come across other examples that you're finding that, all right, well, we're actually redacting in this location and we hadn't talked about that in this space, then absolutely be sure to send across an email to Larry, or I will get that information back out to other folks. Now, in terms of some of the tools to redact, when we started working on our MSc redactions, we started out with just good old-fashioned manual find and replace, and discovered that that was not going to be very scalable, at least for MSc, because we submitted samples to 3 different outcomes. So we had roughly 300 student documents that we were having to redact. And the find and replace was just not going to work. It may be more doable since we're talking about 75 to 100. But if you find that that's becoming too cumbersome, the tool that, and again, this is very optional. I can't stress that enough. There's no expectation that this is necessary or required. But the MSC, when we were going through that process, they had said that if the find and replace was too cumbersome, then the tool that they had suggested was called Redact by OpenText. And that tool was about, I think the license for that was about $350 to $400. And we made the decision locally to go ahead and purchase that and use it because we knew we were going to be participating in the MSC this year. We knew that we have this project coming up, and we expect to participate in the MSC next year. So that given the number of samples and stuff, we made the decision to purchase it. The way that functions is you can provide, you essentially create a library of terms, words, names, whatever that need to be redacted. And you build that list, and then it processes the document through pretty quickly, and it redacts it. And I think you can actually specify how it's redacted, whether it's just plain white space, or we selected to put the black space over it so that it was clear that something was redacted and not just omissions in the student document. And that did make the redactions, it was still somewhat time consuming just because of, we were having to back check, and we wanted to make sure that no one was going to be able to identify the institution, our faculty, our students from the redactions. So we spent a lot of time doing it. However, the Redacted tool did speed things up quite a bit. It also increased our level of confidence, the degree of confidence that we were catching everything. As coordinator in our office, that list for us included the name of every building, and then likely misspellings. We included every faculty member that was teaching a section from which we drew a sample. We included all of their names in it, and then we took the list of student names from our demographic data, and we included those in the redaction library as well, so that all of those names were captured by the redaction tool. But as I mentioned, that's something that was suggested by the MSC, so I wanted to at least mention it here. But caveat, of course, is that it's absolutely optional. It's not a requirement to use it. And so I don't know, has anyone used other tools for redaction purposes?
Well, I was going to ask you, does LiveText offer any perk or additional feature like that might be something that could be used by all of us?
I don't know of one, but I'll check and see.
It never hurts to ask,
I will ask.
Other than that, I'm not aware of our access to anything, so I'll make sure to talk with Lorraine about this one as well.
Yeah, it'd be one of the things. I would be surprised if they've gotten to the point of having that tool, because I've had conversations with others, with several of the vendors that operate in that space. And it seems to be one of those ones that, yeah, we thought about it's kind of on the development roadmap, but it's a little bit further out on their roadmaps than what's usual. If LiveText already has it, then I would say they're probably definitely ahead of the game on that one.
Gotcha. Okay.
But now that would be, especially for these LiveText and others that are developing those the tools and the platforms for the interinstitutional assessment processes, that would definitely be a good feature to have.
That and the plagiarism detector, but that's a whole nother ballgame.
Yeah, that's a whole other ball of wax. We have, we use at San Jack, we use Blackboard Outcomes that lays over the top of the Blackboard Learn, And so, of course, we trust that our faculty are, catching the plagiarism in the course, but there's not a process in place for them to go in and remove, and of course they don't want to because it's a matter of student record at that point. If a student has plagiarized, they don't want to go in and remove the document. The thing is that for Blackboard Outcomes, though, it'll still pull in those plagiarized documents. There's not a way, and we've asked that, there needs to be a way for faculty to mark that somewhere that, look, this one should not be collected, included in the institutional sampling. And so we have had instances where our faculty evaluators have detected plagiarism as they're reading and working on some of these assignments. And some of that comes down to them being familiar with the assignment that's being given and knowing what the frequent instances of plagiarism, the frequent sources of plagiarism actually are. But yeah, you're right. That's a whole nother ball of wax when we're talking about interinstitutional assessment processes like this. That's a big ball of wax.
Maybe for the next round or studies.
Yeah, that's a tough one. So any other questions or comments about kind of the process of de-identifying? Because then what will happen now, if you've already got your samples, then you can start working to make sure that those are de-identified with all the information that needs to be redacted being removed from those documents over the next month or so. And then we're hoping that as you get that done, then we'll have the platform available at this point, probably mid-October, mid to late October, for you to begin uploading those documents. And then that'll allow us to collect all of those by hopefully before Thanksgiving. And so that we're not running into the last couple of weeks of semester that happen after Thanksgiving, because we know how crazy those are for everyone.
Chris, the reality is some of our signature assignments for this semester will not be available until finals week.
Correct. If you're submitting, if you're not, I say, well, we'll make it available so that you can submit. If you're going to be taking samples from this past spring or this summer, you can get those done before Thanksgiving. But if you're taking your sample from this fall, we're in the same exact boat. Most of those signature assignments aren't going to be given until probably until right before Thanksgiving, and some of them may not be due until after Thanksgiving, that last week of class. And so we wouldn't be able to collect until after that. I think the submission of these can run up until, and Larry and I hadn't talked about a specific deadline, but there's really not any reason why that submission can't run all the way through until that first week after finals before Christmas. And there's probably even some room even for early January as well.
Yeah, I'm thinking of the redaction process.
Oh, that's true. Yeah, because if you throw that redaction process on there, then yeah, you probably need to take you a couple of 3 weeks or a month. Probably looking into the submission on that into middle of January at least.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking.
Yeah, if you're taking samples from this fall. So Larry and I will keep that in mind as we start talking about those hard deadlines and stuff for the end of this semester, beginning of next, and kind of how much of a run-up we need from the collection process to the preparations we need to make to facilitate those calibration sessions at the LEAP Forum.
Excellent.
Any other questions or comments? Anything for the good of the cause? Because other than that, that's all we have. That's all I have for the day.
We're good here over at UT Arlington, other than just kind of getting that feedback from Lorraine about confirming Pell eligibility in first gen. And I've already sent an email to her, which I don't expect to hear a quick reply from right now, but also just making sure to go over with her the redaction concepts that we talked about and get the feedback, and we'll send it your way.
Okay. And everybody good at North Texas and Weatherford?
Yeah, we're pretty good here. We've got our sample. We just need to add the demographics and start de-identifying and start collecting the artifacts.
Oh, outstanding. Outstanding. Yeah, it's kind of where we are. And I'm kind of caught in between with using spring samples versus using fall samples, knowing that if I use fall samples, I'm running up against that deadline that we were just talking about and getting all the redaction done and all that other good stuff if we wait until the end of the semester to collect samples. Okay. All right. Well, and as always, this is mine and Larry's contact information. If you have any thoughts or questions that come up afterwards, then don't hesitate to get in touch, and then we'll hopefully respond pretty quickly.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you, and you guys have a great week.
All right. You too.
Thank you.